Welcome, friends. You're watching Ruslan Belov, and today we'll break down the global situation as of March 21st, 2026. There's no shortage of events, and every single one of them is genuinely reshaping the picture of what's happening. Ukraine continues to strike deep into Russian territory with massive drone attacks, reaching as far as the Moscow direction. Trump has declared yet another victory over Iran and, as proof of that victory, lifted sanctions worth $14 billion. If someone had told me a year ago exactly how events would unfold today, I wouldn't have believed them. Let's go through it in order. Ukrainian strikes on Russia. Yesterday evening, a map was published in open sources showing the approximate routes of Ukrainian drones, 4 clearly defined directions. Some of the craft headed toward Moscow, while the majority flew toward the southern regions of the country. Ukrainian sources initially cited a figure of 210 drones. But Russia's Ministry of Defense reported the interception of more than 400 aircraft over the period from 11 in the morning on March 20th to 7 in the morning on March 21st. The gap between these figures is telling. Either the Ukrainian side is understating the scale of the operation, or a portion of the UAVs simply didn't make it into the initial reports. It's important to understand the fundamental tactical logic behind strikes of this kind. A significant share of Ukraine's UAVs are decoy drones whose purpose is not to cause real damage, but to drain Russia's air defense systems and force them to expend costly interceptor missiles against targets carrying no actual warhead. In essence, this is aerial attrition warfare, where the cost of the interceptor vastly exceeds the cost of the thing being intercepted. The drones were tracked over Voronezh, Volgograd, and Saratov oblasts, as well as in the direction of Samara and Ufa. Footage showing a Ukrainian UAV flying directly over Ufa was published in open access by several independent sources. The strike on Saratov, according to a number of sources, targeted an oil storage facility. This fits into a broader operational logic. Pro-Western analysts detected strategic bombers, Tu-160s and Tu-95s, at the Engels II airfield, which with high probability indicates that Russia is preparing a large-scale missile strike within the next 48 hours. The anticipated arsenal includes Kh-101 cruise missiles, hypersonic Zircons and Kinzhals, Iskanders, combined with a mass deployment of strike UAVs. The Ukrainian strike on Saratov's infrastructure was, in all likelihood, aimed precisely at disrupting or complicating those preparations. In response, Russia carried out its own massive strike. 154 drones were deployed during the night of March 21st. The number is lower than Ukraine's, but the key difference lies in composition. Russia deploys primarily combat UAVs carrying warheads, whereas Ukraine makes extensive use of decoy drones to saturate and overwhelm air defense systems. It's possible that Russia may reconsider this approach in the near future and increase the proportion of decoy aircraft, but so far there is no sign of that trend. According to Russia's Ministry of Defense, the strikes targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure and defense industrial complex, Odessa direction. Ukraine published footage confirming the complete restoration of the bridge between the settlement of Mayaki and the southwestern part of Odessa Oblast. This route is one of the key supply corridors for Ukrainian forces from NATO member states. Over the past year, Russia repeatedly struck this crossing with the evident goal of destroying it and disrupting Ukrainian logistics. But Ukraine managed to restore it in full. In the near term, repeated Russian strikes on this section are to be expected, as the bridge's strategic value hasn't changed. Zaporizhzhia direction. Russian forces have concentrated a substantial strike grouping here for an offensive, but over the past 24 hours, no significant confirmed advance has been recorded. Objective control footage that could reliably reflect changes on the ground remains extremely scarce. Ukraine maintains a powerful defensive grouping on this axis, deliberately slowing the advance of Russian units. The central question here is straightforward. Which side will exhaust its resources first in the course of a prolonged standoff? Sooner or later, one of the participants will be forced to break the balance, and that moment could prove decisive for the entire direction. Dobrovolsk-Druzhkivka direction. This is where the most significant operational developments of the past 24 hours have taken place. And this is where the attention of military analysts is now firmly focused. The map has shifted substantially in the corridor between Dobropilya and Druzhkivka. Immediately before the launch of operations on this axis, Russian units concluded their fight for Hryshine. As of March 21st, Russia's Ministry of Defense has not officially confirmed full control over the settlement, but according to mapping services, Russian troops have already reached its northwestern outskirts, and confirmation appears to be only a matter of time. Following that, a new offensive unfolded in the strip between Dobropilya and Druzhkivka. On March 19th, the Ministry of Defense reported an advance in the area of Pavlivka, and the corresponding map correction was made on that basis. The following day, Russian units managed to push further north and consolidate in the area of Priut along the Kazeny Torets River. By March 21st, significant changes are being recorded north of Toretska, in the area of two fortified strongpoints. Russian units have also closed in on the eastern outskirts of Dobropilya, specifically on a small private dacha settlement in the area of Anivska Hreblia and Chernyavske Reservoir. It cannot be ruled out that Russian troops have already entered that settlement. The overall operational logic is clear. The Russian army is seeking to drive a wedge between Dobropilya and Druzhkivka, with a subsequent push toward the settlements of Zolotiy Kolodiaz, Veselye, Ruske, Novomykolaivka, Krasny Kut, and Torske. Reaching that line would allow Russia to shatter the coherent Ukrainian defense on this section, break into open operational space, and establish fire control over Highway T-5-4, the most important supply road linking Dobropilya with the Kramatorsk-Sloviansk agglomeration. In essence, Russia is reproducing and expanding upon the scheme of last autumn's offensive, when reconnaissance and sabotage groups achieved significant northward advances and Ukraine was forced to urgently redeploy reserves to stabilize the front. What appears to be underway now is the second round of that same battle, but with a more substantial grouping and a deeper operational concept behind it. In the Belitsky area, a Ukrainian counterattack in the central part of the settlement has been recorded. Based on the published footage, the grey zone within the settlement has been expanded. Neither side has full control. Belitska has long since become a continuous battlefield where the line of contact runs literally block by block. Konstantinovka section, no significant changes over the past 24 hours. Russian aviation is carrying out bomb strikes against Ukrainian positions in the southern part of the section without any recorded ground advance. The main news of the day is a Russian counterattack from the Chasiv Yar area. Ukrainian forces had been conducting offensive operations near Krasny and in the Shevchenko district in the southwestern part of the city. Some analysts reported an incursion into the Shevchenko district and an advance towards Stupochki and Predtekin, but without video confirmation. Today, the Russian side claims to have repelled all of these counterattacks and to have fully retained its positions. In parallel, Russian units are pressing against the eastern outskirts of Konstantinovka itself. Sloviansk direction, a minor adjustment to the front line south of Reznikivka, has been recorded, confirmed by Ukrainian video materials showing strikes on Russian forward positions. A steady trend is visible. The Russian army is gradually tightening a pocket around a large forested area in the salient between Nikiforyuka, Pleshcheyivka, and Reznikivka. In the near future, Ukrainian units will in all likelihood be forced to abandon this forested area and withdraw toward Alexandrivka, Kupiansk, and Kharkiv directions. No significant developments. Footage of airstrikes on the dam near the Oskil Reservoir is circulating, though the authenticity and exact date of recording have not been confirmed. Several months ago, a similar strike was carried out against this same object, so it's quite possible that Ukraine managed to partially restore the crossing before it was struck again. If the crossing has indeed been seriously damaged once more, this will significantly complicate Ukrainian logistics in the Sviatohirsk forest area. The Kharkiv section, no changes. The United States, Iran, and the Persian Gulf. The US president once again declared Iran to be completely defeated and, as a demonstration of that victory, lifted sanctions on 140 million barrels of Iranian oil loaded during the period from March 20th to April 19th, precisely 1 month's export window. Iran's estimated revenue is in the region of $14 billion. A number of politicians and independent analysts have already characterized this decision not as a sign of victory, but as an effective capitulation of Washington's negotiating position, given that sanction pressure on Iranian oil exports had been one of the primary tools for coercing Tehran. Against this backdrop, Iran struck the American base at Diego Garcia, an atoll in the Indian Ocean, approximately 4,000 kilometers from Iranian territory, with 2 ballistic missiles. One missile suffered a technical failure in flight without detonation. The second was intercepted by air defense systems. The strike came immediately after Britain, the island's sovereign, officially announced that it had granted the United States permission to use the base for operations against military infrastructure in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran's response was instantaneous, and that itself is a signal. Iran is tracking every decision made by the coalition in real time and responds without delay. A range of 4,000 kilometers fundamentally reshapes the strategic picture. It means that Iranian ballistic missiles theoretically cover American military installations in southern Europe as far as Switzerland, including bases in Italy, Greece, and a number of other NATO countries. This fact can no longer be ignored in any planning across the region. In parallel, Saudi Arabia granted the United States access to Prince Sultan Air Base in the northwestern part of the kingdom. The motives are ambiguous. This could represent either an expansion of platforms from which to strike Iran, or a repositioning of aviation assets to a safe distance from Iranian missile systems that have repeatedly struck targets in the vicinity of Riyadh. The two interpretations are not mutually exclusive. According to incoming reports, the coalition struck an Iranian nuclear facility, reportedly a uranium enrichment center in the Natanz area. This is yet another rung on the escalation ladder, with foreseeable consequences. Iran will in all likelihood now treat similar nuclear installations on Israeli territory as priority targets for its next strikes. Trump presented the Gulf monarchies with an open financial bill. Continuing the war will cost them $5 trillion. Ending the conflict immediately will cost $2.5 trillion. At the same time, the American president made clear that the United States has no particular stake in opening the Strait of Hormuz. The strait matters far more to the Gulf states themselves, which means American forces could theoretically leave the region at any moment, leaving the monarchies to face Iran alone. The officially stated objectives of Operation Epic Fury include the destruction of Iran's ballistic missile and nuclear programs, the suppression of Iran's air defense system, and the security guarantee for Gulf states. Unblocking the Strait of Hormuz is not on that list. According to analysts, the United States is already approaching formal fulfillment of all its declared objectives, and that creates a wide space for political maneuver and leverage. The lifting of sanctions on Iranian oil also carries an element of indirect pressure on the Gulf monarchies. 140 million barrels of Iranian exports directly displace volumes that Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain could have sold, particularly since their own export routes are partially blocked by the ongoing conflict. If the United States decides to extend this export license for another month beyond April 19th, the pressure on the monarchies will multiply, pushing them toward more active participation in the operation against Iran. That, in all likelihood, is Washington's core calculation: not to persuade allies through arguments, but to hit them where it hurts, in their oil revenues. Military analysts estimate that the full American grouping, including amphibious assault ships with Marines, will not be concentrated in the region until mid-April. Until then, the mutual strikes will continue without a decisive turning point. The only guaranteed consequence of this period will be a further rise in oil prices and the continued degradation of the entire region's export infrastructure. Whether the Marines will see real combat action or remain an instrument of political pressure, nobody can say today. But the mere fact of their deployment is already reshaping the calculations of every party involved. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, and leave your likes. All the best to you.